I buried my brother 42 years ago. His name was Ethan. He was 19 when a Greyhound bus slid off a frozen mountain highway in 1983. 17 people died that night. I saw his body. I signed the papers. I watched them lower his coffin into the ground. That's how sure I was. Last week, my phone rang at 2:03 in the morning. The number was from Vancouver unknown, but somehow familiar. I almost let it ring out, until I heard a voice I hadn't heard since I was 23. Michael? Is this Michael? The sound froze me in place. Then came a whisper that cracked with disbelief and memory. It's me, Ethan. I finally remember who I am. My blood turned to ice. That was impossible. I was the one who identified his body. I was the one who told our mother her youngest son was dead. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. The phone pressed against my ear felt heavy, like it was made of stone. The voice on the other end was rough, uncertain, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. But beneath that gravelly tone was something unmistakable. I knew that voice. I had heard it laughing in the kitchen on Sunday mornings, begging for extra pancakes, teasing Mom about her singing. Ethan? I whispered, my throat suddenly dry. The man exhaled shakily. Yeah, he said, almost like he was testing the word. Yeah, Ethan. That sounds right. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the walls were shaking. Who are you? What kind of sick joke is this? I demanded, but the words came out cracked and uneven. I'm sorry, he said softly. I didn't mean to scare you. I found something. A newspaper clipping. About a bus crash in 1983. It said 17 dead. And one of the pictures it's me. But the name underneath says, Ethan Harris. That's who I am, isn't it? I closed my eyes. Every muscle in my body went rigid. The room around me seemed to tilt and spin. That name, our name, hadn't been spoken aloud in decades. Where are you? I asked, forcing my voice to stay steady. I don't really know, he answered. A place called the Downtown East Side, I think. Somebody told me that. I live in a shelter. East Hastings Street. But I don't remember how I got here. I don't remember much of anything before maybe 15 years ago. 15 years. My mind raced. If this was real, then where had he been for the other 27? I tried to think rationally. Scams. Con artists. Crazy people who dig up names online. But who would know the blue front door of our childhood home? Or the way Mom's pancakes always burned on one side because she used too much butter. Then he said, sometimes I dream about snow. About screaming. About the cold. And sometimes I see a house. Blue door. And a woman's voice saying, you're safe now, baby. Tears blurred my vision. The sound of his breathing on the phone wasn't just familiar, it was real. Ethan had a scar, I said quietly, on his left forearm. From when he fell off his bike when he was 7. 12 stitches. A long pause. Then, I have a scar like that. I never knew where it came from. My throat tightened. I wanted to speak, but no words came out. I don't know who I used to be, he whispered. But I think I was your brother. The clock read 2:17 a.m. The world felt suspended, like time had stopped just to listen to us breathe across 42 years of silence. I sat there on the edge of my bed, staring at the phone as if it were something alive, something dangerous. Every logical part of my brain screamed that this couldn't be real. But logic didn't explain why my heart was pounding the way it used to when Ethan and I raced bikes down Sycamore Hill. Listen to me, I said carefully. You said you don't remember who you are, but you remember my name. How? He hesitated. It came back to me tonight. I was looking through this old box they keep at the shelter, stuff people donate. There was a newspaper inside. From January 1983. Someone had clipped an article about a bus crash. The headline said 17 dead in mountain tragedy. There was a photo of me. Younger. Smiling. But it said my name was Ethan Harris. I've been staring at it for days. Something about that facade feels like mine. A chill ran down my spine. I remembered that photo. It was from Ethan's high school graduation, the one Mom framed on the mantel. My mind flashed back to the night we got the call, to the drive through the snow, to the sterile smell of the morgue in Hope, British Columbia. I was 23, shaking so hard I could barely sign the forms. The coroner pulled back a white sheet, and I saw what I thought was Ethan's face, bruised, swollen, broken. I said, "Yes. That's him." Then I went home and told Mom her youngest son was gone. What if, I whispered now, barely audible, what if I was wrong? Michael? His voice was small, fragile. There's more. I keep having these flashes. Snow. Screaming. Metal twisting. Then darkness. Sometimes, I see lights above me like headlights and then nothing. But there's another dream that keeps coming. A house with a blue door. Someone cooking pancakes that smell like blueberries. A woman humming a song. And every time I wake up, I'm crying, and I don't know why. My chest ached. Those pancakes were Mom's Sunday ritual, her way of pretending we were okay after Dad left. Ethan used to eat twice as many as anyone else. That house, I said slowly, was ours. You were 5 when Mom painted that door blue because you said it made the house look happy. There was silence on the line. Then I heard a sound, a quiet, broken sob. "Michael," he said finally, his voice trembling, "I think I found myself in that newspaper, but I don't know who I've been all this time. I think I woke up once in a hospital maybe 15 years ago. They said I didn't have any ID. I couldn't tell them my name. I just drifted. From shelters to the street. Every now and then I'd see flashes of snow or hear someone calling me Ethan in my dreams. It was too detailed to be a prank. Too personal to be random. My hands shook as I reached for a pen. "Where are you now?" "A place called East Hastings," he said after a pause. "There's a shelter here. I think it's called St. Bridget's. I can't remember the number." I scribbled the address as he recited it, my handwriting jagged and uneven. "Stay there," I told him. "Don't move. I'm leaving right now. Michael. Please. Just stay put. I'll find you." He went quiet for a long time, then said softly, "Okay. I'll wait." The line went dead. I stared at the phone for several seconds, feeling like I'd just spoken to a ghost. Then I was on my feet, heart hammering, pulling on jeans, grabbing my wallet and car keys. Linda stirred beside me, half asleep. "Michael, what's wrong?" I looked at her, my wife of 38 years, and couldn't find the words. How do you tell someone your dead brother just called from 42 years in the past? "I'll explain later," I said, already heading for the door. "I have to go." And before she could stop me, I was in the car, heading into the dark, chasing a voice that shouldn't exist. The night swallowed the road ahead of me. My headlights cut through sheets of rain as the mountains rose like black ghosts on either side. The dashboard clock glowed 2:32 a.m. Vancouver was 7 hours away, maybe more if the roads iced over. I kept both hands tight on the wheel, afraid that if I slowed down even for a second, reality might catch up and tell me this was all a cruel mistake. The tires hissed against the wet asphalt. Each mile marker felt like a heartbeat. I turned off the radio because I couldn't stand the noise. All I could hear was the echo of his voice, "It's me, Ethan." The same soft rhythm, the same inflection he used when he'd sneak into my room after a nightmare and whisper, "You awake?" I gripped the steering wheel harder. Could someone fake that? Could someone mimic a memory that lived in the marrow of your bones? The wipers squeaked back and forth, counting time like a metronome. The rain blurred the road into a gray tunnel, and somewhere between hope and merit, my mind began replaying that night in 1983. I'd been 23, just out of college, working construction to pay bills. Ethan had taken the bus to visit our aunt in Vancouver before starting university. When the call came, Mom dropped the phone. I still remember the operator's voice, "There's been an accident on the Coquihalla Highway." The morgue in Hope had smelled of bleach and cold metal. The coroner looked tired, his voice mechanical. 19-year-old male, presumed to be your brother. I nodded, numb. When he pulled back the sheet, my stomach lurched. The body was battered, swollen from the cold. The face barely resembled the kid who used to build treehouses and chase our dog through the yard. But the hair was the same color. The height. The jacket Mom had knitted for him last Christmas. "Yes," I'd said. "That's him." Then I signed the forms. 17 bodies lined up in that cold room, and I never thought to question it. Grief doesn't leave room for questions. It just demands you survive it. The rain turned to slush as the highway climbed. My headlights caught the reflection of a green sign, Vancouver 240 kilometers. My pulse quickened. 42 years of certainty, now unraveling with every mile. I tried to imagine what kind of life Ethan might have lived if he had survived. Where he might have gone, who might have found him. Could he have been trapped somewhere, lost, forgotten? The thought made me sick. At one point, I pulled over to the side of the road and sat there in the dark with the engine running. My hands were shaking. What if it wasn't him? What if this was some desperate man clinging to a name he'd found in an old clipping? I could be driving into a scam, or worse, Simone's madness. But then I remembered the scar. The house with the blue door. The pancakes. Details no stranger could invent. I started the car again. The first streaks of dawn were breaking by the time I crossed into the Fraser Valley. The sky was bruised purple, clouds hanging low over the mountains. My eyes burned from exhaustion, but I didn't dare stop. Every instinct screamed that if I didn't reach him soon, he might disappear again, slip back into the shadows he'd somehow escaped. By the time the Vancouver skyline came into view, it was almost 9:30 a.m. My coffee was cold, my hands cramped around the steering wheel, and my heart felt like it had been beating for 7 hours straight without rest. I whispered into the empty car, half prayer, half plea. "Please, Ethan. Be real." And then I drove on, toward the downtown east side, toward the brother I'd buried 42 years ago. Downtown Vancouver was just waking up when I arrived, but the air already carried the stale smell of exhaust and rain-soaked pavement. My GPS led me deeper into the downtown East City, a place I'd only heard about on the news. Even in daylight, it looked like a city trying to remember what hope used to feel like. Boarded-up windows, graffiti, people huddled under plastic tarps. Every block seemed to hum with quiet desperation. The shelter was an old gray building wedged between a pawn shop and a boarded-up cafe. Its sign read St. Bridget's Community Center, the paint peeling like sunburned skin. I parked half up on the curb and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My reflection in the windshield looked older than it had the night before, lined, pale, uncertain. Inside, the smell hit me first. Industrial cleaner mixed with unwashed clothes, metal coffee pots, and something faintly sweet, like cough syrup. Behind a counter sat a woman in a denim jacket, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion but kind. "Can I help you?" she asked. "I'm looking for someone," I said, my voice tight. "His name's Ethan Harris." He might not remember that name. He called me early this morning. Said he was staying here. She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yeah. Ethan. Older guy. Thin, gray ponytail. He asked to use the phone around 2. Said it was important. Nice man, quiet. Is he here now? Check the common room. She pointed toward a half-open door. Through there, on your left. My stomach turned. My legs didn't feel like they belonged to me as I walked down the short hall. Each step sounded too loud. The door creaked when I pushed it open. The room beyond was a patchwork of tables, mismatched chairs, and faded posters about recovery programs. A small TV in the corner murmured the morning news. About a dozen people sat scattered around, most staring blankly into space. And then I saw him. He was sitting near the window, hunched over a styrofoam cup. His hair was long and silver, pulled back into a thin ponytail. His shoulders were narrow, his clothes worn thin. From where I stood, he could have been anyone but my brother. Yet something about the tilt of his head made my throat close up. Ethan, I said, barely above a whisper. He turned. The world seemed to tilt again. His face was lined and weather-beaten, tanned by years of sun and wind. A scar curved across his cheekbone. But the eyes, those deep brown eyes flecked with gold, were the same ones that used to look up at me when we were kids, asking if I'd built the treehouse right. Michael, he said. His voice cracked on my name. I froze. Every muscle locked. My chest ached so sharply it felt like something inside me had splintered. He stood, slow and stiff, like every movement cost him effort. Up close, I could see the tremor in his hands, the thinness of his frame. He looked both old and fragile, but there was something unmistakable in his expression, recognition mixed with fear, as if he wasn't sure I was real either. You came, he said softly. I wasn't sure you would. Show me your arm, I blurted. He hesitated, then pushed up the sleeve of his flannel shirt. There, running along his left forearm, was a pale, jagged scar, faded with time, but the same shape, the same length I remembered. 12 stitches. A lifetime ago. My knees nearly gave out. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. Oh, God, I whispered. We stood there, 2 old men surrounded by strangers who didn't notice the miracle or the madness happening right in front of them. I think, I said, my voice trembling, we need to sit down. He nodded. Yeah. We do. And as we both lowered ourselves into those worn-out chairs, 42 years of silence and grief sat down between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us felt fragile, as if one wrong word could make the whole illusion shatter. Ethaner, the man who might be him, watched me with eyes that looked both ancient and familiar. I wanted to say 100 things at once, but all that came out was a single, broken sentence. What happened to you? He rubbed a hand over his face, the skin rough and weathered. I don't remember, he said quietly. I don't remember the crash. I don't remember anything before waking up in a hospital 15 years ago. The nurse said I was found on the street with no ID, beaten up. I told them I couldn't remember my name. They ran tests, but the doctor said my brain looked fine, physically fine. Just blank. I leaned forward. And since then? He shrugged. Shelters. Odd jobs. Sleeping under bridges. I've got pieces, flashes of things that don't make sense. Snow. Screaming. Then nothing. His voice cracked. When I saw that newspaper clipping, something snapped open. That picture, that name, Ethan Harris. It felt like I'd been underwater for decades and suddenly came up for air. My heart twisted. The logical part of me kept whispering, this can't be real, but my instincts were drowning in recognition: the way he rubbed his thumb against his fingers when nervous, the way his right eyebrow lifted slightly when he was unsure. These were things Ethan had done without thinking. I reached for my phone. "We can know for sure," I said. "DNA. There's a lab here in Vancouver that can test for sibling relation. We'll go today." He hesitated. "What if I'm not him?" "Then we'll know," I said. "But if you are, I can't spend another minute not knowing it." He nodded slowly. "Okay." We left the shelter together. I half expected him to vanish as soon as we stepped into the grey drizzle of East Hastings Street like a ghost dissolving in daylight. But he didn't. He stood beside me, squinting against the rain, his breath visible in the cold air. At a small cafe nearby, I bought him a sandwich and coffee. He ate like someone who hadn't had a real meal in weeks. Watching him stirred something in me that I hadn't felt in years: protectiveness, maybe, or the deep ache of memory. At 3 p.m., we walked into the lab, a sterile glass building that smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper. The woman at the counter, whose name tag read Chen, explained the process: cheek swabs, paperwork, 2 days for results. My hands shook as I signed the consent forms. The test itself took 5 minutes. 2 cotton swabs, a sealed envelope, a receipt. But those 5 minutes felt like the longest stretch of time I'd ever lived through. When it was over, we stepped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the city coated in silver light. Ethan stood beside me, staring at the wet pavement as if trying to read answers there. "Where will you go tonight?" I asked. "Back to the shelter, I guess." "No," I said instantly. "You're coming with me. We'll get a hotel. Just until we know." He opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off. "Please, Ethan. Just let me do this." He gave a small nod. "All right." We found a modest hotel near Stanley Park, 2 beds, no questions asked. The clerk gave us a look that said he'd seen worse pairs than a clean man and a worn-out stranger. I paid cash. When we got to the room, I ordered pizza while Ethan showered. He was in there almost an hour. When he came out, his hair was clean and slicked back, his beard trimmed away. For the first time, I could see the shape of his jaw, the curve of his nose, details that memory had blurred but my heart had never forgotten. He caught me staring and smiled shyly. "I look different, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "But not that different." We ate in silence, the television murmuring in the background. Finally, he said, "Thank you for this. For believing me enough to try." I swallowed hard. I haven't decided what I believe yet. But I need to know. He nodded, his eyes wet. "Can I ask something?" "Of course." What was I like before? The question hit me like a physical blow. I set my pizza down and leaned back. "You were good," I said after a moment. "Kind. You were the kid who brought home stray cats, who cried when mom killed a spider. You wanted to be a vet. You loved pancakes. You were always laughing." He smiled faintly, tears gathering in his lashes. "I wish I could remember that." "Maybe you will," I said softly. "Maybe when we know for sure." That night, while he slept in the bed beside mine, I lay awake listening to his breathing. Deep, even, the rhythm of someone who finally felt safe. For the first time in 42 years, I didn't know if mourning would bring grief or redemption. But I knew one thing: I was ready to find out. 2 days later, at 2:34 in the afternoon, my phone rang. I was sitting on the edge of the hotel bed, staring out at the grey sky over Vancouver. Ethan was by the window, tracing shapes on the glass with his finger like a restless child. My heart jumped when I saw the caller ID, Vancouver DNA Lab. I answered on the second ring, my hand trembling so badly I nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Harris, a woman's calm voice said. This is Sarah Chen from the lab. I'm calling with your test results. Ethan turned toward me, his face pale, eyes wide. Yes, I said, barely breathing. The probability of full siblingship between you and the other individual is 99.97%, she said. You are biological brothers. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The air left my lungs like I'd been punched. I turned to Ethan. He stared back, his mouth open, searching for words that wouldn't come. Are you certain? I managed to whisper, though I already knew. Yes, sir, she said. The results are conclusive. I thanked her, hung up, and just sat there. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the faint hum of the hotel heater and Ethan's uneven breathing. Then he let out a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob. It's real, he whispered. I'm really him. And that was it, the dam broke. I crossed the room and pulled him into a hug. His body felt light, fragile, but solid. Real. The smell of clean soap still lingered from his shower. For 42 years, I'd dreamed about this moment, and now it was here, but it didn't feel like a dream. It felt heavy and human and raw. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were crying. What happens now? He asked softly. I don't know, I admitted. But we're not done. We need to understand what happened to you. Ethan nodded. There's someone who might help. A doctor at the free clinic Dr. Eleanor Shaw. She's been helping me with my memory. She believes me. We went that afternoon. The clinic was small, tucked between a thrift store and a bakery. Inside, everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and cinnamon. Dr. Shaw was in her 50s, with kind eyes and a calm, grounding presence. She listened patiently as we told her everything: the crash, the identification, the lost decades, the DNA test. She didn't interrupt, just took notes, occasionally glancing between us like she was piecing together a long unsolved puzzle. When we finished, she folded her hands. May I examine you, Ethan? He nodded. She checked his reflexes, eyes, and coordination, then gently pressed her fingers along the back of his skull. Ethan winced. There's an old fracture here, she said quietly. A depression, the kind we see after severe blunt trauma. You've had significant head injuries, probably more than one. Your ribs show signs of old fractures too. So do your arms. She took a deep breath. Mr. Harris, she said to me, I think your brother did survive the crash. But based on what I'm seeing, he was badly injured, possibly thrown from the wreck. If rescuers didn't find him right away, hypothermia could have set in. He may have been found later, unconscious, by someone who didn't take him to a hospital. I frowned. Why wouldn't they? Her eyes darkened. Because they didn't want questions. There are remote operations in the BC interior: illegal logging, drug labs, small-scale mining. They use transient labor. People without ID, without families looking for them. Someone like Ethan, with head trauma and no memory, would have been useful. Easy to control. Ethan stared at the floor, his hands trembling. So you're saying someone kept me? I think so, Dr. Shaw said softly. For years. Maybe until your health began to fail, or your memory loss became worse. Then they likely left you somewhere, Vancouver, maybe knowing you'd disappear into the streets. The room was silent except for the faint hum of a heater. I could barely form words. How many years? I asked. 15, maybe 20, she said. Hard to say. The injuries suggest prolonged physical strain, repetitive trauma, malnutrition. The body adapts, but it also records everything. Ethan's body has been telling his story for decades. It just took us this long to listen. Ethan's voice cracked. I thought I was crazy. I thought I was just broken. You were hurt, she said firmly. And you survived. That's not broken, that's extraordinary. He swallowed hard, eyes glistening. I don't even know who I am anymore. Dar. Shaw smiled gently. You're both. The boy you were and the man you became to survive. You can't erase either. I looked at my brother, at the lines carved into his face, the gray in his hair, the way he seemed older than me now. The guilt hit me like a wave. All this time, I whispered. Mom died thinking you were gone. I buried someone else's son. He reached out, his hand shaking as he gripped mine. You couldn't have known. You did the best you could. I wanted to believe him. Dar. Shaw stood. You'll both need time. Therapy, recovery. You found each other again, but that's just the start. When we stepped outside, dusk had settled over the city. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows on the wet pavement. Ethan stood beside me, staring up at the sky. I don't remember the crash, he said, but I remember snow. Cold. And then light. Maybe Mom was watching over me. I swallowed hard. If she was, she didn't stop until you came home. He nodded slowly, eyes shining in the fading light. For the first time in 42 years, I believed in miracles. Not the kind from heaven, the kind that crawls through hell and somehow makes it out alive. The next morning, I packed up our things and checked out of the hotel. Ethan stood beside me in the lobby, wearing a donated jacket and a pair of shoes I'd bought him the day before. He looked uneasy, like someone standing in a life that didn't quite fit. You don't have to do this, he said as we walked toward the car. Yes, I do, I told him. You're coming home. He didn't answer. He just stared down at the wet pavement, hands shoved deep in his pockets. The drive back to Kelowna felt longer this time, maybe because we both knew what waited on the other end. The landscape rolled past mountains, rivers, forests, but I barely saw any of it. Ethan sat quietly beside me, watching the scenery like it was both familiar and foreign. Every now and then, he'd ask small questions. Did Mom like living near the lake, or what was I studying before college? I answered what I could, each reply feeling like another fragile thread tying him back to a life that had once been his. By the time we reached my driveway, the sun had already dipped behind the hills. The porch light was on. Linda stood outside waiting, her arms folded against the evening chill. I'd called her the night before, told her everything. She'd cried quietly on the phone, then said only 3 words, bring him home. When we stepped out of the car, she looked at Ethan for a long moment. Her expression wavered between disbelief and awe. Then she walked toward him and opened her arms. Welcome home, Ethan, she said softly. He hesitated, his face tightening like he didn't know what to do, but then he let her hug him. His shoulders trembled, and for a second, the man who had spent decades surviving on the streets looked like the 19-year-old kid who used to sit at Mom's kitchen table with blueberry syrup dripping down his chin. That first week was hard. Harder than I expected. Ethan barely slept the first few nights. I'd find him sitting on the porch at 3 a.m., wrapped in a blanket, staring at the lake. When I asked if he was okay, he'd just say, too quiet, and force a small smile. He couldn't stand loud noises or crowds, so we kept things simple. Linda handled it better than I did. She cooked meals that filled the house with the smell of comfort: chili, baked bread, blueberry pancakes on Sunday morning. Ethan cried the first time he tasted them. He started therapy twice a week with a trauma counselor Dr. Shaw recommended. The sessions left him drained but calmer. He'd come home and nap for hours afterward, sometimes waking up shaking, sometimes smiling faintly, like he'd managed to grab hold of one more memory before it slipped away. Small fragments began returning, pieces of a life buried under decades of fog. He remembered our dog, Baxter. The Christmas we built a snow fort so big the neighbors complained. The day Mom painted the door blue. One evening, he came into the living room holding a framed photo from the bookshelf. Our family, summer of 1982. He touched the glass lightly. "I remember this shirt," he said, pointing to the striped one he'd worn that day. "Mom bought it too big because she said I'd grow into it." I didn't realize I was crying until he turned and smiled at me. Guess she was right. In quieter moments, though, I saw the darkness in his eyes. The years of survival had carved deep lines not just on his face but in his mind. Sometimes he'd flinch when a door closed too hard. Once, when a car backfired outside, he hit the floor before realizing what he was doing. He laughed it off, but I could see the shame flicker across his face. "You're safe," I told him one night as we sat on the back deck watching the stars. He nodded but didn't look at me. "I know," he said. "It just doesn't always feel that way." The following week, he got a part-time job at a garden center on the edge of town. It was his idea. "Plants don't talk," he said with a crooked grin. "They just grow." The first day he came home with dirt under his fingernails and a spark of life in his eyes, I felt something inside me unclench. Linda started calling him the quiet miracle. Our kids came by on weekends. My daughters hugged him gently, my son shook his hand awkwardly, and my grandson, 5 years old, immediately decided Ethan was his new best friend. Watching Ethan really laugh for the first time since that phone call, I realized how much I'd missed that sound. But even joy came with a shadow. At night, I still heard him whisper in his sleep, caught between worlds, begging someone unseen to please let him go. Healing, I was learning, wasn't a straight line. It was a circle, pain looping back into gratitude, sorrow folding into hope. And every morning when I saw him sitting at the kitchen table, alive, drinking coffee, sunlight on his face, I thought, if this is what a miracle looks like, I'll take its scars and all. 3 months have passed since that phone call at 2 a.m., and some mornings, I still wake up wondering if it really happened. Then I hear the sound of coffee brewing downstairs, and Ethan humming an old song he doesn't remember learning, and I know it's real. He's still in therapy, still piecing together fragments of a life he lost. Some memories come in flashes: our mother's perfume, the dog barking, the way snow used to fall outside our window on Christmas morning. Others are gone, maybe forever. But he doesn't chase them anymore. He just lets them return when they're ready. Last week, we visited Mom's grave. The headstone still bears Ethan's name. We stood there in silence, the wind brushing through the pines. "Should we change it?" I asked. He shook his head. "No. Leave it. That's for the boy who died that night. I'm not him anymore." He's right. The young man who boarded that Greyhound in 1983 never came home, but the one standing beside me now fought through 42 years of darkness to find his way back. That night, we sat on the deck watching the sun sink behind the lake. The sky burned gold and violet. Ethan turned to me and asked, "Do you think Mom knows?" I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "I think she does. She's probably the one who made sure you found your way here." He nodded, looking up at the first stars. "I'm glad you answered the phone, Michael." "Me too," I said. And in that quiet moment, I realized something: miracles don't always bring back the dead. Sometimes, they just remind the living that it's never too late to come home.